What are some of the creepiest experiments ever done in human history? Story 1. The monster study is terrifying because it proved how easily people can be broken using nothing but authority and repetition. In 1939, researchers at the University of Iowa, led by Wendell Johnson, wanted to study stuttering. They believed positive reinforcement could improve speech. But there was a problem. The orphanage they chose didn't have enough children who actually stuttered, so they created the condition. 12 children with perfectly normal speech were placed in the stutterer group. Adults, framed as experts, repeatedly told them they were speaking incorrectly. They were warned before talking, criticized mid-sentence, and told their speech problems would only get worse. Over time, the children didn't develop stutters, but they stopped speaking. They became anxious, withdrawn, and deeply ashamed. What are some of the creepiest experiments ever done in human history? Story 2. The first blood transfusions are terrifying because nobody knew what blood was yet. In the 1800s, before blood types, before germ theory, before ethics committees, a doctor looked at a violent psychiatric patient and decided the problem might be his blood, so he replaced it. Not with another human's blood, with an animal's, a calf. The logic was chillingly simple. Calm animal, calm blood, calmer mind. Tubes, veins, no anesthesia, no understanding of immune reactions, just confidence and a man strapped down while foreign blood flowed into him. Sometimes the patient convulsed. Sometimes they screamed. Sometimes they died. Sometimes they lived and no one knew why. Doctors debated whether sheep blood made people docile, whether goat blood made them aggressive, whether madness could be diluted out like poison. What makes this unsettling isn't the ignorance, it's the certainty. These weren't fringe quacks. They were respected physicians, working carefully, taking notes, convinced they were on the edge of a breakthrough. Blood transfusion eventually became one of medicine's greatest lifesavers. But it started with people being treated like containers, like chemistry sets, like problems you could solve by swapping fluids until something changed. Story 3. The Weaponized experiments are horrifying because they were cruel, deliberate, and successful. In the 1940s and 1950s at Weaponized Hospital, researchers wanted to understand what caused tooth decay. Instead of studying volunteers, they used institutionalized patients with intellectual disabilities, people who couldn't give informed consent and had no ability to refuse. The experiment was simple and brutal. Some patients were fed massive amounts of sugar, not just sweets, sticky toffees designed to cling to teeth and maximize damage. Caramel-like candies eaten multiple times a day, specifically to rot mouths as efficiently as possible. And it worked. Teeth decayed rapidly. Cavities exploded across entire mouths. Pain, infection, and tooth loss were treated as data points. The suffering wasn't a side effect. It was the method. What makes Weaponized especially disturbing is that the results became foundational. Modern dentistry's understanding of sugar frequency and dental caries comes directly from this abuse. Science has advanced. Public health improved. But it was paid for by people who were never given a choice. The Weaponized experiments sit in that uncomfortable category of history where the knowledge is real, the benefits are undeniable, and the means are indefensible. They're a reminder that science doesn't become ethical on its own. It only becomes ethical when someone decides that some results simply aren't worth the cost. Story 4. The Milgram shock experiments are terrifying because they showed how easily ordinary people can be made to do horrific things without being cruel, angry, or insane. In the early 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram told volunteers they were helping study learning and memory at Yale University. Their role was to administer electric shocks to another person whenever they gave a wrong answer. The shocks increased step by step, all the way up to 450 volts. The twist: the person being shocked was an actor. No one was actually harmed. But the participants didn't know that. They heard screams, begging, silence. They were told the learner had a heart condition. At one point, the responses stopped entirely, implying unconsciousness or death. And still, when calmly instructed by a man in a lab coat, most people continued pressing the button. Not because they wanted to, because an authority figure told them to. Many participants were visibly distressed, sweating, shaking, protesting, yet obeyed anyway. Afterwards, some believed they had ended someone. The experiment didn't reveal hidden evil. It revealed something worse. How easily responsibility dissolves when someone else claims authority. No hatred required, just procedure, reassurance, and a sense that you're not the one really deciding. Milgram didn't prove people are monsters. He proved how little pressure it takes for good people to act like one. Story 5. What happened in Montreal under CIA sponsorship is terrifying because it was done quietly, to civilians, by people who thought they were being helped. In the 1950s and 60s, as part of MK Ultra, experiments were carried out at Allen Memorial Institute, affiliated with McGill University. Patients seeking treatment for depression or anxiety were subjected to extreme procedures without informed consent. They were given massive doses of LSD and other drugs, put into drug-induced comas for weeks, played recorded messages on loop psychic driving thousands of times, meant to erase personality and rebuild it from scratch. Led by psychiatrist Ewan Cameron, the goal was nothing less than breaking the mind down to raw material. Some patients never recovered. Memories gone. Personalities flattened. Lives ruined. Families left with someone who came home alive but fundamentally altered. The assassin programming angle is debated, but the intent wasn't subtle. Control, erase, rewrite. And afterward? Forget it ever happened. The truly chilling part isn't the drugs. It's that people trusted doctors, walked into a hospital, and were used as test subjects in a Cold War experiment that treated human identity as something disposable and classified the damage when it didn't work. Story 6. Finding anesthesia was horrific because for centuries, pain was the control group. Before it worked, doctors experimented directly on people, often themselves, prisoners, or patients who had no real choice. Ether, chloroform, nitrous oxide. No one knew the dose, the risks, or what would happen next. Some subjects passed out peacefully. Others vomited, convulsed, or died. Surgeons kept going anyway because sometimes it worked. Early surgeries were public events. Patients were strapped down screaming while doctors raced the clock. Speed mattered more than precision. Anesthesia promised something radical: time. But to find it, researchers pushed substances until people stopped reacting, and then pushed further to see if they'd wake up. Chloroform ended enough patients that doctors debated whether pain-free surgery was worth the deaths. Ether was explosive. Nitrous oxide causes hypoxia. Nobody fully understood respiration, circulation, or brain chemistry yet. Failure wasn't theoretical, it was visible on the table. What makes this disturbing isn't that people suffered, it's that suffering was treated as acceptable data. Modern surgery exists because someone somewhere inhaled something unknown and stopped screaming long enough for doctors to say, that might work. Anesthesia didn't arrive cleanly, it arrived over bodies, and only later learned how to be gentle. Story 7. I just listened to a podcast from CBC called Brainwashed. It's about these experiments being done at McGill University in the 50s and early 60s. This doctor, Ewan Cameron, would take people who checked themselves into the health center for basic issues like postpartum depression and perform experiments. Sensory deprivation, electroshock therapy, way over the normal amount, putting people into comas and playing repeating phrases over and over to them. Seen Stranger Things? They were definitely influenced by this. Oh yeah, and giving people acid without their consent. By the end, some of the people would have reverted back to the stage of being 2-year-olds, not being able to feed themselves or use the washroom, not knowing who they are. Story 8. In Wotu, Japan, the military arrested thousands of Chinese and some Dutch people. They experimented on them by letting fleas infected with bubonic plague feast on prisoners, or then freezing a person's hand totally and then thawing them to get completely degloved, or then putting a person in a pressure chamber, making them release their bowels and intestine. This operation was known as the Epidemic Prevention of Water Purification Department. Though they have made a movie on this, Men Behind the Sun, and it is the most disturbing movie I've watched. And in it, they used an actual footage of an autopsy of a young boy. Story 9. So there was a woman named Henrietta Lacks who was a poor black woman with 5 children, and went to Johns Hopkins University, one of a few hospitals that would see poor black people in its time. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer. The cancer was the first living human cells to multiply outside of the human body in a lab environment. Her cells are still alive and are being used in medical research to this day. Her family didn't know they had her cells until years after it had already been used to create new medicines and was part of hundreds of medical studies. If I'm not mistaken, she died during treatment and her family hasn't seen any money from the research that would be impossible without her cells. Story 10. It absolutely qualifies, and it's one of the most quietly horrifying chapters in medicine. For much of the 20th century, many doctors believed that infants didn't truly feel pain. The logic was clinical and catastrophic. Babies couldn't remember it, their nervous systems were immature, their reactions were reflexes, not suffering. So procedures were done without anesthesia, open heart surgery, major abdominal operations, circumcisions. Infants were sometimes given paralytics to stop movement, not pain relief. Story 11. In the 50s, young Puerto Rican women would be unknowingly sterilized when they went to the doctor or dentist for treatment. When they had to have minor surgeries, they'd be sterilized, for no reason. They did it so much at the time that some towns had empty classrooms for years in a row, meaning women had pretty much stopped giving birth in certain areas of Puerto Rico during the 50s. America. Story 12. That one's real, and it's horrifying because it actually worked. In the 1950s, Soviet surgeon Vladimir Demikov performed a series of experiments creating two-headed dogs, not conjoined twins, not illusions. He surgically grafted the head and upper body of one dog onto the neck of another living dog, connecting blood vessels so both heads were conscious at the same time. Both heads could see, drink milk, and move their mouths. The transplanted head reacted to stimuli. The host dog remained alive. Some survived minutes, some days, a few lasted weeks. These experiments went on for at least 5 years. Demikov wasn't trying to be grotesque. That's the unsettling part. His goal was transplant science, figuring out how organs might survive in a new body. And in a narrow technical sense, he succeeded. His work later influenced heart and lung transplantation. But the cost was paid in living animals that existed in a state no organism was ever meant to experience. There was no anesthesia ethics, no oversight, no real discussion of suffering. Just proof-of-concept surgery pushed as far as hands and scalpels could go. Seeing the photos, especially knowing they weren't fakes, hits differently. They're not shock images. They're documentation. Medical history is full of breakthroughs. This one reminds you that progress doesn't automatically come with mercy. And sometimes the only thing separating visionary from monster is whether history decides the results were useful. Story 13. In 1920, psychologist John B. Watson wanted to prove that fear could be learned. So he used a toddler, known to history only as Albert. At first, Albert showed no fear of animals. He happily reached for a white rat, rabbits, dogs, and other fluffy things. Then the experimenters changed the conditions. Every time Albert touched the rat, they struck a steel bar behind his head with a hammer, producing a sudden, terrifying noise. No tasing, but loud enough to cause intense distress. After repeated pairings, Albert began to cry at the sight of the rat alone. The fear generalized. He became frightened of rabbits, dogs, fur coats, even Santa masks with white beards. A fear response had been deliberately installed. The worst part, they never properly deconditioned him. The study ended, and Albert was taken away, still afraid. This wasn't fringe science. It became foundational to behaviorism. It's still taught in psychology textbooks. What makes it horrifying isn't just the cruelty, it's how casually it was done. A child treated as proof of concept. Fear reduced to a lever you could pull. The experiment showed that phobias can be learned. History showed something else too. Early psychology was willing to traumatize a child just to win an argument about theory. Story 14. Yes, this did happen, and it's among the most chilling examples of science being used as torture. During World War II, the Japanese military's Unit 731 conducted medical experiments on prisoners of war and civilians. One of the methods involved injecting pure water directly into the bloodstream. The rationale was coldly technical. Without salts, water disrupts osmotic balance. Red blood cells swell and rupture. Circulation fails. The body collapses from the inside. It was excruciating and often fatal. What makes this especially horrifying isn't just the cruelty, it's the intent. These weren't executions, they were tests. Researchers varied volumes, injection rates, and temperatures. They documented reactions. Suffering was the data. Prisoners were referred to as logs. Dehumanization was built into the language, so it could be built into the procedure. After the war, much of the research was hidden or traded for immunity, meaning many perpetrators were never tried. This isn't ancient history or rumor. It's documented, corroborated, and still difficult to fully confront. Cosmic horror imagines indifferent forces wiping us out. This was worse. Humans applying knowledge deliberately to maximize pain, then writing it down as progress. It's a reminder that the scariest experiments aren't the ones that failed, they're the ones that worked, and were kept secret because they worked too well. Story 15. Launching a man into space was terrifying, because it was done before anyone knew if it was survivable. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin was strapped into Vostok 1 and fired into orbit atop a controlled explosion. No human had ever been that fast, that high, or that isolated. No one knew if weightlessness would cause insanity, blindness, heart failure, or death. Some scientists genuinely worried the human body might simply stop working. The capsule had barely any controls. Gagarin wasn't really flying, he was cargo. If something went wrong, there was no rescue. No abortion guaranteed survival. Re-entry itself was a gamble. Extreme heat, violent forces, parachutes that had never been tested this way with a living person inside. And the wildest part? He wasn't even guaranteed to land in the capsule. He had to eject mid-air and parachute down separately. Another first, another unknown. It worked. History celebrates it. Smiles, parades, statues. But strip away the triumph, and what remains is this. Humanity took one of its own, put them on top of a bomb, and launched them into a place that actively tries to end you, just to see if we could. Every spaceflight since then rests on that moment of absolute uncertainty, when survival was a hypothesis and courage was the only data point. Story 16. The Japanese studies on the common cold are disturbing precisely because the goal sounded so harmless. During World War II, researchers at Unit 731 didn't just study plague and anthrax. They also experimented with everyday illnesses, including respiratory infections. Prisoners were deliberately infected, isolated, exposed to cold, stress, dehydration, and malnutrition to see how susceptibility changed. The question wasn't how to help people recover. It was how the environment and physiology could be manipulated to make illness more effective. The subjects weren't volunteers. They were prisoners of war and civilians, treated as disposable. Researchers tracked incubation times, symptom severity, transmission rates, and immune collapse. Many experiments were repeated until statistically clean results emerged. Treatment wasn't the endpoint. Observation was. What makes this chilling isn't the scale of the disease. It's the mindset. Even something as mundane as a cold became a weaponized variable when ethics were removed. Illness wasn't an accident to be prevented. It was a system to be optimized. After the war, much of this data was buried or quietly traded for immunity, leaving victims without justice and history with gaps. Story 17. That's the part people struggle to sit with. When the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nuclear weapons had barely left the laboratory. Trinity was the first test, Hiroshima was the second, Nagasaki the third. After that, the world finally understood what the weapon actually did, because civilians had shown us. It's impossible to separate military logic from human reality. Whatever the strategic arguments, the people under those bombs weren't abstractions. They were children walking to school, families cooking breakfast, people living ordinary lives who had no control over the war being fought above them. In a single moment, their entire world was erased by a force they couldn't have imagined. That's what makes it so haunting. Nuclear weapons don't discriminate. They don't target soldiers. They annihilate environments, homes, hospitals, neighborhoods, along with everyone inside them. The suffering didn't end with the blast either. Radiation lingered invisibly, affecting survivors for decades. History often frames Hiroshima and Nagasaki as the end of a war. For the people there, it was the end of normality itself. You're right, attacking civilians is gruesome no matter who does it or why, and nuclear weapons forced humanity to confront a terrifying truth: that our technology had outpaced our moral capacity to control it. The bombs didn't just destroy two cities, they permanently changed how fragile civilization suddenly looked everywhere. Story 18. A quietly terrifying one is the third wave. In 1967, high school teacher Ron Jones ran a week-long classroom exercise to show how fascism takes hold. It started innocently. Posture rules, a slogan, a salute. Discipline, unity, pride. The students liked it. Then it escalated. Membership cards appeared. Informants emerged. Students began policing each other. Outsiders were mocked. Participation stopped being optional. Kids who questioned it felt isolated. Some begged to be let in. All of this happened in a normal classroom with ordinary teenagers in 5 days. No violence, no threats, just structure, belonging, and a sense of purpose. By the end of the week, Jones revealed it was an experiment. Many students were shaken, not because they'd been tricked, but because of how easy it was. How quickly they'd accepted authority, suppressed doubt, and enforced rules on peers without being told to. What makes the third wave creepy isn't what happened. It's how little it took. No propaganda machine. No years of conditioning. Just a few rituals and a promise of meaning, and people were ready to give up autonomy almost immediately. Story 19. In East Germany, the secret police, the Stasi, developed Zersetzung, decomposition, as a psychological method to neutralize dissidents without arresting them. No prisons, no trials, just quiet, systematic mind games. Targets wouldn't know they were under attack. Their mail would arrive late or open. Friends would suddenly distance themselves after subtle rumors. Jobs would dissolve for vague reasons. Objects in their homes would be moved slightly. Lights flicked on and off. Anonymous complaints would appear. Relationships would collapse under invisible pressure. Nothing dramatic, nothing provable. That was the point. The Stasi believed visible repression created martyrs. Psychological erosion created compliance. Victims often blamed themselves, thinking they were paranoid, unlucky, or losing their grip. Many developed anxiety, depression, or withdrew from society entirely. What makes Zersetzung terrifying isn't cruelty, it's precision. A state studying human behavior well enough to dismantle a person's life while leaving no single act to protest. Suffering engineered to look like coincidence. Story 20. A quietly creepy one tied to early Soviet science is Pavlov's conditioning experiments. In the early 1900s, Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov studied digestion, but ended up uncovering something much darker about behavior. He noticed his dogs began salivating before food arrived, just from footsteps or lab routines, so he leaned into it. Pavlov rang a bell every time food was given. Eventually, the bell alone caused the dogs to salivate. No food, no hunger trigger, just association. That part is taught in textbooks. What's unsettling is the implication. A biological response, automatic, unconscious, could be installed by repetition. No understanding required, no choice, just wiring. Later Soviet thinkers took this idea very seriously. If reflexes could be conditioned in animals, why not in people? If behavior could be shaped mechanically, ideology could be reinforced the same way. Pavlov himself warned against simplistic applications, but the idea escaped the lab. The experiment isn't scary because dogs drooled. It's scary because it shows that behavior doesn't always come from belief, reason, or intent. Sometimes it comes from patterns imposed long enough that resistance never forms. Story 21. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch ran a simple test. Participants were shown a line and asked which of 3 other lines matched its length. The answer was obvious. A child could do it. Here's the trick. Everyone else in the room was an actor. One by one, the actors confidently gave the wrong answer. Then it was the participants' turn. No threats, no pressure, just a group calmly agreeing on something that was clearly false. And most people went along with it. About 75% of participants gave an answer they knew was wrong at least once, just to avoid standing out. Some even started doubting their own eyesight. They weren't stupid. They weren't weak. They were normal. That's what makes it unsettling. Reality didn't change. Perception didn't fail. Social pressure simply overrode certainty. No ideology. No authority figure. Just other people saying the wrong thing together. The Asch experiments showed that truth is fragile when isolation is the cost of honesty, and that humans will often choose belonging over being right, even when the evidence is literally right in front of them. Story 22. A deeply creepy one. Quiet, clean, and very real is the Asch conformity experiments. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch ran a simple test. Participants were shown a line and asked which of 3 other lines matched its length. The answer was obvious. A child could do it. Here's the trick. Everyone else in the room was an actor. One by one, the actors confidently gave the wrong answer. Then it was the participants' turn. No threats, no pressure, just a group calmly agreeing on something that was clearly false. And most people went along with it. About 75% of participants gave an answer they knew was wrong at least once, just to avoid standing out. Some even started doubting their own eyesight. They weren't stupid. They weren't weak. They were normal. That's what makes it unsettling. Reality didn't change. Perception didn't fail. Social pressure simply overrode certainty. No ideology, no authority figure. Just other people saying the wrong thing together. The Asch experiments showed that truth is fragile when isolation is the cost of honesty, and that humans will often choose belonging over being right, even when the evidence is literally right in front of them. Story 23. In 1954, psychologist Muzaffar Sharif took a group of normal 11-year-old boys to a summer camp at Robbers Cave State Park. The kids didn't know they were part of a study. First, the boys were split into 2 groups and allowed to bond separately. They chose names, built identities, felt proud. Then the researchers introduced competition. Games, trophies, zero-sum rewards. Things escalated fast. The groups began insulting each other, stealing, sabotaging cabins, burning flags. One group planned physical attacks. None of this was suggested directly. The environment did the work. Then the researchers flipped the switch again. Competition stopped. The only way to succeed was cooperation, fixing a broken water supply, pulling a stuck truck. Gradually, hostility dissolved. Friendships formed across group lines. What makes this creepy isn't the fighting, it's how easily identity and hatred were engineered, and how reversible they were when conditions changed. No propaganda, no ideology, just structure. The experiment showed that group conflict doesn't require evil people. It requires categories. Once you understand that, it's hard not to see the same mechanics everywhere and wonder how often us versus them was designed, not inevitable. Story 24. In 1968, teacher Jane Elliott ran a classroom exercise with elementary school kids to demonstrate discrimination. She split the class by eye color. One day, blue-eyed kids were told they were smarter and better. The next day, the roles flipped. Nothing else changed. Within hours, the superior group became confident, loud, and cruel. They interrupted, mocked, and excluded the other kids. The inferior group grew quiet, anxious, made more mistakes on tests, and avoided eye contact. Performance shifted measurably. In a single day, based on nothing but an arbitrary label backed by authority. No threats, no punishment, just a rule everyone was told to accept. What makes it unsettling is how fast it worked, and how real it felt to the kids. Many reported strong emotions they couldn't explain. Some carried the memory for years. The experiment showed that prejudice doesn't need history, ideology, or hatred. It just needs a category, and someone in charge saying it matters. Once that happens, behavior rewires itself almost instantly, and people start acting like the roles were always true. Story 25. In 2002, surgeon Bruce Moseley ran a study on patients with knee pain. All patients were told they were receiving arthroscopic surgery. They were anesthetized, prepped, and wheeled into an operating room. But only some actually got surgery. Others received sham operations. Incisions were made, tools were clanked, surgeons talked through the procedure. Then the incisions were closed, no repair performed at all. And afterward, the placebo patients improved just as much as the real surgery group. Same pain relief, same mobility, same recovery reports, or years. Nothing was fixed inside their knees. Their brains did the work. What makes this creepy isn't deception, it's implication. The body responded to belief, ritual, and expectation as powerfully as to physical intervention. The operating room itself acted like a drug. It forces an uncomfortable question. How many treatments work because of chemistry or mechanics, and how many work because the brain expects them to? The experiment didn't prove doctors were frauds. It proved that meaning, authority, and belief can physically alter experience. And that sometimes the most powerful tool in medicine isn't the scalpel, it's the story you tell the patient while holding it. Story 26. In 1973, psychologists John Darley and Daniel Batson ran a study with seminary students at Princeton Theological Seminary. The students were told to walk across campus to give a talk, some on the parable of the Good Samaritan itself. On the way, each student passed a man slumped in an alley, coughing and clearly in distress. Here's the twist. The experiment wasn't about morality. It was about time pressure. Some students were told they were early. Some were told they were on time. Others were told they were late. That single variable decided almost everything. Those who felt rushed overwhelmingly stepped over the man, even when they were about to give a talk on compassion. Belief didn't matter. Values didn't matter. Education didn't matter. Context did. What makes this unsettling isn't hypocrisy, it's fragility. The study showed that kindness isn't always a stable trait. It's a behavior that collapses under mild stress, even in people who care deeply about doing the right thing. No cruelty, no manipulation, just a schedule. It's a reminder that the scariest experiments don't reveal monsters. They reveal how easily circumstance can override who we think we are and how thin the margin is between helping someone and not even noticing them. Story 27. A quietly unsettling one is the false memory experiments, especially Lost in the Mall. In the 1990s, psychologist Elizabeth Loftus wanted to test how reliable memory really is. Participants were told several childhood stories provided by family members. Most were real, one wasn't. They were told that as a child they'd once been lost in a shopping mall, frightened, crying, eventually rescued by an adult. The event never happened. Family members confirmed it was completely made up, and yet, about a quarter of participants began to remember it, not vaguely, vividly. Emotions, details, what stores looked like, how scared they felt. Some embellished the memory on their own. Nothing traumatic was done, no pressure, no hypnosis, just a suggestion. What makes this creepy is the implication. Memory doesn't work like a recording, it works like a story you keep rewriting. And if a simple prompt can install a fake childhood event, then eyewitness testimony, personal identity, even your sense of self become negotiable. Story 28. In 1999, psychologists Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris showed participants a short video of people passing basketballs and asked them to count the passes. Simple task, focus required. Midway through the video, a person in a full gorilla suit walks into the scene, stops, beats their chest, and walks out, on screen for several seconds. About half the viewers never see it, not miss details, not forget later. They genuinely don't perceive the gorilla at all. When told afterward, many insist it wasn't there. Some accuse the researchers of trickery. That's the unsettling part. Nothing was hidden, nothing was fast. The gorilla is obvious once you know to look. But attention filtered it out so completely that reality itself was edited in real time. The experiment revealed inattentional blindness. When you focus on one task, your brain can fail to register major unexpected events happening right in front of you. No stress, no authority, no manipulation. Just attention doing what it evolved to do, and quietly deciding what exists. It's creepy because it means awareness isn't guaranteed. You can be looking directly at something important, obvious, even shocking, and never know it happened. Which raises a haunting question. What gorillas are walking through your life right now while you're busy counting passes? Story 29. In the 1920s, researchers studied workers at the Hawthorne Works to see how productivity changed with better lighting. They increased the lights, productivity went up. They dimmed the lights, productivity still went up. They changed break times, pay structures, schedules, same result. Eventually, they realized something unsettling. It wasn't the changes that mattered. It was the fact that the workers knew they were being observed. Just being watched made people work harder, behave differently, and report greater satisfaction, even when conditions objectively worsened. Attention itself altered behavior. Once the study ended and observations stopped, productivity fell back to normal. What makes this eerie isn't manipulation, it's implication. Human behavior isn't stable. It flexes under attention alone. Surveillance doesn't just record reality, it creates a different one. No rewards, no punishments, just awareness. The Hawthorne effect suggests that who you are at work, online, or in public may not be who you'd be without an audience, and that modern life, saturated with observation, might be quietly shaping behavior in ways we don't consciously choose. You don't need to be controlled to change. Sometimes it's enough to know someone's watching. Story 30. In the late 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman studied how animals respond to unavoidable stress. Dogs were placed in situations where mild shocks occurred randomly and couldn't be escaped. Later, those same dogs were put in a new setup where escape was easy. Just step over a low barrier. Many didn't even try. They lay down and endured it. Nothing was physically stopping them anymore. They had learned that effort was pointless, so they stopped attempting to change their situation, even when control was returned. That's the unsettling part. The experiment showed that passivity can be trained, not through punishment alone, but through unpredictability. When outcomes feel disconnected from actions, motivation collapses. The subject isn't lazy or weak, they're adapting to what they believe is reality. This idea later reshaped how psychologists understand depression, trauma, and institutional behavior. People stuck in systems where effort never pays off can internalize helplessness so deeply that opportunity feels invisible. The horror isn't the experiment itself. It's realizing how easy it is to convince a mind, animal or human, that escape doesn't exist, and how hard it is to unlearn that belief once it's set.